And welcome to the solutions video for LFP Investigation 3 checkup. This is standard G2, and we are going to be talking about how to solve the Pythagorean theorem problems. So number 1 says, show how you use the Pythagorean theorem to solve each of these problems. And in a right triangle, A and B are the lengths of the legs, and C is the length of the hypotenuse. If A is 4 miles and B is 4 miles, then what is C? And if necessary, round your answer to the nearest tenth. So reading all of the instructions first is a great idea. So this is the general format that they're all going to go in. You don't have to rewrite it every time, but you do need to have numbers either showing A squared plus B squared equals C squared, or C squared minus A squared equals B squared. So for this one, my legs, A and B, are both 4. So we're going to do 4 squared plus 4 squared, and that's equal to C squared. When I solve those, I get 16 plus 16 is C squared. So 32 is C squared, but remember, we're looking for C, not C squared. So you've got to take the square root of both sides, and the square root of C squared is C, and then that's approximately 5.7 miles. Square root of 32 is approximately 5.7. Number 2, what is the length of C? If necessary, again, round to the nearest tenth. So we have our 2 legs, and we're looking for the hypotenuse. So addition problem again. We have 9 squared plus 4 squared, getting us C squared. 81 plus 16 is C squared. 81 and 16 give you 97. Again, that's C squared, not C, so we need to take the square root of both sides. And C is approximately 9.8. Square root of 97 is about 9.8. Number 3, what is the length of A? If necessary, round your answer to the nearest tenth. So this time we're missing a leg, right? One of the pieces that make the right angle. So we're given the hypotenuse at 10 and the other leg at 5. So this is going to be a subtraction. We're going to do the hypotenuse squared minus the leg squared. And that's going to equal the missing leg squared. So 10 squared minus 5 squared is equal to A squared. 100 minus 25 is equal to A squared. 100 minus 25 gets you 75, and again, that's A squared. We only want the value of A, though. That A squared would be the square, right, units, if we found the area of that whole square. So we're going to take the square root of that to find the side length, and the square root of 75 is about 8.7. These are in yards. I didn't mention that before. Very few people put units on their measurements, and that's an important thing to notice. So make sure that you're getting your units in there. Is it in yards, miles? Number 4, in a right triangle, A and B are the lengths of the legs, and C is the length of the hypotenuse. If A is 32 centimeters and C is 40 centimeters, what is B? If necessary, round your answer to the nearest tenth. Also, if you need to draw a picture, but I can see C here is my hypotenuse. A is one of my legs, so I know that that's going to be a subtraction problem. So the hypotenuse squared, which is 40, minus the leg squared, is going to equal the other leg squared. 40 squared is 1,600. 32 squared is 1,024. When I do the subtraction, I get a difference of 576. And that's B squared. We want B, so we're going to square root both sides. The square root of B squared is B, and the square root of 576 is exactly 24 centimeters. Number 5, what is the perimeter of the triangle? Round your answer to the nearest tenth if needed. So this time we're going to have to find C and then add up the 3 sides to actually find the perimeter. So kind of a 2-step problem. We're given the 2 legs, so this is going to be an addition problem. 6 squared plus 8 squared is equal to our hypotenuse, or C squared. 36 plus 64 is our C squared. When I add 36 and 64, I get 100. Again, that's C squared, so we need to take the square root of both sides, and we'll find that C is equal to the square root of 100, which is 10. But we're not finished yet. If C is 10, then we're going to need to add that to the 6 and the 8. So our perimeter is adding up those 3 sides. 6 plus 8 plus 10 gets us 24 feet. So the perimeter of that triangle is 24 feet. Number 6, we're looking for a perimeter again, and it says round your answer to the nearest tenth again. We are given a hypotenuse this time and a leg, so this is going to be our subtraction. We have 8.3 squared minus 5.6 squared equaling b squared. When I do that math, 8.3 squared minus 5.6 squared, I get 37.53 is equal to b squared. Take the square root of both sides, and you get b is approximately 6.1. So again, we know this third side length. So to find the perimeter, we have to add all 3 of those side lengths together. 8.3 plus 5.6 plus 6.1 gets me a perimeter of 20 inches. So the distance around the outside of this triangle is 20 inches. Number 7, what is the length of B? This time we want the exact length, meaning I don't want you to put it in the calculator and find the square root unless that square root is a whole number. If not, leave it under the square root symbol. So we have a hypotenuse of 8, and we have a leg of 6, and we're missing the leg B. So we're going to do 8 squared minus 6 squared to get a b squared. 64 minus 36 is b squared. When I do that subtraction, I get 28 for b squared. If I take the square root of 28, it's not a whole number. So I'm going to leave it right underneath that square root sign. B is equal to the square root of 28 meters. And you can simplify the square root of 28, but it didn't ask us to simplify here. We're going to simplify, I think it's the last problem on the quiz. So if you simplified this, good job. Number 8, Ava is attending a school orchestra concert. She sees her math teacher seated 5 feet ahead of her and her science teacher seated 12 feet to her right. So here's where she's sitting. 12 feet to her right is her science teacher, and 5 feet ahead of her is her math teacher. So they want to know how far apart are the teachers sitting. We have a leg of 5 and a leg of 12. We're missing our hypotenuse for this one. So 5 squared plus 12 squared equals x squared. 25 plus 144 is equal to x squared. When I add these, I get 169 is x squared, but again, I want x, not x squared, so I need to take the square root of both sides. And the square root of x squared is x, and the square root of 169 is 13. So those teachers are 13 feet apart. Number 9, Mitchell takes a 7-inch by 5-inch rectangle of fabric and cuts from one corner of the piece of fabric to the diagonally opposite corner. That would be this blue line. Now Mitchell has 2 equally sized triangles of fabric. What is the perimeter of each triangle? Again, a 2-step process, right? We need to find out how long this X is, that diagonal cut, and then we need to add up all 3 sides. So I'm missing my hypotenuse, so I'm going to use addition. 5 squared plus 7 squared is equal to x squared. 25 plus 49 is equal to x squared. 74 is equal to x squared. I'm going to round the square root of 74. It's about 8.6. And when I add that 8.6 to my 5 and my 7 for my other two side lengths, I get a perimeter of 20.6 inches. Number 10, a triangle has sides with lengths of 6 centimeters, 11 centimeters, and 13 centimeters. Is it a right triangle? And how do you know? So I needed a yes or a no, and I needed you to show me mathematically or in words how you knew. So I chose to do it with numbers. I put my legs squared to get 157. I added those up, the left side of a squared plus b squared. And then the right side would be my 13 because that's my biggest side length. I know that has to be my hypotenuse. And 13 squared is 169. And 157 does not equal 159 or 169. So this is not a right triangle because a squared plus b squared does not equal c squared. 11, same sort of problem. A triangle has sides with lengths of 77 inches, 85 inches, and 36 inches. Is it a right triangle, and how do you know? Again, these aren't written in order this time, but you have to know the biggest side is your hypotenuse. So that's going to be the one that is on the right side of the equation by itself. So the 36 squared and the 77 squared are going to be added together. Those are your legs. And when you add those together, you get 7,225. And if you do 85 squared, you also get 7,225. So yes, this is a right triangle because a squared plus b squared here is exactly the same as c squared. Number 12, a triangle side lengths of 7 kilometers, 24 kilometers, and 25 kilometers. Is this a right triangle, and how do you know? So 7 squared plus 24 squared, my two legs, give me 625. And then when I take the hypotenuse squared, 25 squared, I get also 625. So yes, this is indeed a right triangle because a squared plus b squared does equal c squared. Number 13 wanted us to use the Pythagorean theorem to prove this is a right triangle. So I first found the areas of all three of my squares, just like when we were doing our Cheez-It activity. So the A side length had an area of 4. The B side length had an area of 9. And when I boxed in my C, I found that 5 times 5 gets me my 25, and 25 minus those 4 triangles that each have an area of 3, 25 minus 12 leaves me with 13 for that center, or the c squared. So 25 minus 12 got me that 13. And now I can use those numbers to prove that A, which would be 2 squared, plus B, which is 3 squared. So 2 squared plus 3 squared is indeed going to get me the square root of 13, right? Because if I know the area, I can find the side length by taking the square root. So 4 plus 9 gets me my 13. 14, they wanted us to find the shortest distance between the points 110 and 10, -2. So for me to go from 1 over to 10, that's a distance of 9. And to go from -2 up to 10, that's a distance of 12. So I have legs of a right triangle, and I'm going to look for the hypotenuse using the Pythagorean theorem. So 12 squared plus 9 squared would get me my c squared. 144 plus 81 is c squared. When I add those up, I get 225 for my c squared. When I take the square root of both sides, c is equal to the square root of 225, which is exactly 15. 15 units between these 2 points. Just a couple more. 15, find the distance between the points 6.2 and 1.7, and then round the decimal to the nearest tenth if needed. So for my leg A, you could draw this out. Some people went back over to the graph from number 14 and actually graphed it out. But from my side A are my x coordinates. I'm going from 6 to 1. And that's a difference of 5. You're always going to take the absolute value of that answer because you can't have a negative distance. So for this one, the absolute value of 6 minus 1 is 5, and that's just 5. But B, we're going from 2 to 7 on my y coordinate. So 2 minus 7, that's not 5, that's 7. 2 minus 7 is -5. And the absolute value of -5 is also +5. So we have 5 squared plus 5 squared is equal to c squared. 25 plus 25 is c squared. 50 is c squared. And again, take the square root of both sides. You get the square root of 50 is equal to the square root of c squared. And that is about 7.1. It came out to 7.07. This seemed to be one of the ones that a lot of people had a hard time rounding properly. So 7.07 rounds to 7.1. That's the nearest tenth, 1 decimal place. 16 wanted us to draw a line segment that was exactly the square root of 41 units long. So we're going to look at our perfectly square numbers. We need 2 of them that add up to 41. So I found 25 and 16 add up to exactly 41. To find my side lengths, I need to take the square root of those 2 numbers. So I need a side length of 5 and a side length of 4. So if I did my 1, 2, 3, 4 here and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here, that line that connects those, this line right here, is exactly the square root of 41 long. And you could have written it on there so that I knew that that was, I have my fancy markers up there. That's exactly the square root of 41. And our last problem is going to ask us to simplify this radical. So the radical is square root of 147. And using division and my perfectly square numbers, I found that 147 is divisible by 49, which is my perfectly square number, with a remainder of 3. So square root of 49 times the square root of 3 is how I break that up. And then I can simplify the square root of 49 to 7. Square root of 3 cannot be simplified, so your final answer is 7 square roots of 3. And that's it for this. If you have any other questions before the retake, please don't hesitate to come and see me and ask. I'm always happy to work with you. Have a great day. Figure out how to turn off the recording now.